Hello, my name is Herb Geraghty, and I am the Executive Director of Rehumanize International, which is a secular, nonpartisan organization dedicated to creating a culture of peace and life. We work to bring an end to all forms of aggressive violence against human beings, including but not limited to abortion, capital punishment, embryonic stem cell research, euthanasia, police brutality, torture, and war. So, let's get started. When I normally do this talk in front of a real audience, the title is Bad Words, How Our Words Dehumanize. I don't know if the hosts were able to make that the title of this video somewhere around me, but just so you know, that is the title. And in light of that title, Bad Words, I typically ask my audience, what exactly are bad words? Now, I don't want you to go rush to the comments section and try to give examples, and that is because the first things that probably come to your mind are swear words. While those kind of words are certainly rude to say in a number of contexts, relatively they're not that bad, and they're not what I'm focusing on today. The bad words I'm talking about are the ones that seek to dehumanize. These often can take the form of slurs, words that seek to other a certain class of human beings based on race, nationality, ability, gender identity, sexual orientation, or other immutable characteristics. These words tend to be obvious. When you're called a slur, you pretty much know it. Slurs are used by people with certain privilege to intentionally other and dehumanize those below them on the social hierarchy. But what is perhaps even more insidious than these intentionally dehumanizing slurs is language that dehumanizes unintentionally. That is because even well-meaning people may get caught up in it. But let's just take a step back. Why does this matter? Who cares if our words dehumanize? They're just words, right? Well, it matters for two reasons. The first is that the words we use shape our perceptions. By using dehumanizing language, we negatively shape the way we view groups of people. We begin to see some as subhuman, and as studies have shown, when we view someone as less than us, it creates a psychological separation, which makes it easier to commit violence or to permit violence against them. Something I think that the audience at the Cardinal O'Connor conference typically knows is that each and every human being has an inherent dignity by the virtue of our shared humanity. So, our language should reflect that. Think historically. What are ways that whole groups of people have been subjugated under the law? Slavery, the Holocaust, the genocide of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. In these cases and more, before mass violence was able to be perpetrated against these groups, dehumanization had to occur. I normally have a handout for this section, but if you hit pause and visit rehumanizeintl.org/badwords, you'll find a graphic we made that shows the different ways human beings have been dehumanized both historically and today. Okay, so I'm giving you time right now to hit pause and go to the website rehumanizeintl.org/badwords. Okay, did you go? Okay, I'm assuming you went, so welcome back. So as you saw on that graphic, what I think is most fascinating are the parallels between historical and modern forms of dehumanization. The Nazis, for example, openly referred to Jewish people as parasites and other animals, a rhetorical move that the American media, of course, condemned, while turning around and calling Japanese combatants and citizens yellow vermin to justify things like immoral internment camps, desecration of Japanese soldiers' bodies, and even, eventually, the mass murder of civilians at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In fact, 2 days after hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children were killed by the American military with the atomic bombs, our president, Democrat Harry S. Truman, defended the decision when he said, The only language they seem to understand is the one we have been using to bombard them. When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him like a beast. It is most regrettable, but nevertheless true. End quote. Flash forward to today. How many of us have heard pro-choice people say, the fetus is just a parasite on a pregnant woman's body? Or, despite the mountains of evidence that immigrants actually contribute to and improve the economy, have heard them referred to as parasites or dangerous animals. This is similar to the invention of the term welfare queens to paint poor, typically black mothers as undeserving burdens, parasitic on the system. There's a common thread. Instead of viewing people as human beings first, there is often ideological incentive to see them as only tools for financial gain or loss. I think this is pretty clear when we look at the abortion industrial complex, who claim to be necessary because they're there to help people facing crisis pregnancies, when we know in reality, organizations like Planned Parenthood are merely profiting off of those crises by selling lucrative abortion services in place of any actual help. It's why, according to their own annual reports, for about every 50 abortions Planned Parenthood performs, they provide one person with prenatal care. And for every 80 abortions, just one adoption referral. It's why over 96% of pregnant people who walk into a Planned Parenthood for pregnancy-related services walk out without their child, whose body is now either in a medical waste bin or getting ready to be shipped off to the highest paying research institution. To sustain their business with enough cash to buy their executives Lamborghinis, actually helping people just isn't gonna cut it. It's why they claim that they need millions and millions of our tax dollars, or else women will suffer, while using their super PAC to pour millions and millions of dollars into influencing elections. Profit is frequently a motivator of dehumanization and violence. It's not a coincidence that on the other side of the typical political spectrum from Planned Parenthood, we see weapons manufacturers and other defense contractors pouring money into electing candidates who they believe they can influence to champion hawkish foreign policy, usually dehumanizing the citizens of whatever country they're campaigning to bomb. I was first really introduced to the way we so often dehumanize those so-called foreign combatants in an article on antiwar.com. In it, Robert Kohler discusses a piece in New York Magazine that was investigating the discrepancies in NGO reporting of the Iraq-Syria war zones compared to the Pentagon's body count. In it, he states, but, the article notes, the official numbers also reveal a sharp uptake in civilian deaths. And suddenly, I have to scream, stop. Every person, every dead person is a human being. At some point, that has to matter. An uptick in civilian deaths? When I deconstruct this language, I encounter a shrug of indifference, a detached sense of necessity. What can you do? If the dead were Americans, white Americans, would the words be so cold and detached? On September 11th, 2001, there was an uptick in dead office workers in New York City. End quote. So, since reading this, it's really challenged my assumptions and has shifted my perception of the way that we talk about people who are impacted by the military-industrial complex, and how my own language can unintentionally contribute to the ideology that some lives matter more than others, or that some deaths are somehow more tragic. It matters how we talk about these issues because it really does affect how we see them, and on a societal scale, can affect policy. Consider what happens when a beloved celebrity dies by suicide. All over social media, you will see eulogies and calls for mental health awareness and wider access to treatment. These posts are undeniably a good thing. However, I have to point out a small inconsistency I can't help but notice. Some of those who mourn the deaths of wealthy celebrities are the same people pushing for greater access to assisted suicide in our country. On the surface, this appears odd. However, when you dig a little deeper and view the issue through the lens of the historical oppression and dehumanization of disabled people, it starts to make sense. Very few proponents of assisted suicide will stand behind the idea that this right to die should be available to all Americans. For example, in no state can I, a relatively healthy 24-year-old with a history of depression, walk into my doctor's office, tell them I want to die, and be treated with physician-assisted suicide. Rather, the patient must have some sort of illness or qualifying condition. It is for this reason that nearly every national disability rights organization that takes a position on the issue opposes bills to legalize assisted suicide. They intimately understand that the way this legislation has been drafted creates a clear contrast between the rights of the disabled and ill and the rights of the physically healthy. It's even more concerning when examining the research that establishes that mental health issues, including suicidal ideation, are frequently comorbid with disabilities and certain illnesses, particularly terminal ones. Assisted suicide, like many acts of discrimination, relies on the idea that some lives are worth more than others and creates a legal double standard wherein some are given suicide prevention and some are given suicide assistance in the form of a poison pill or a lethal injection. This is just part of a long history of the sick and disabled being treated as subhuman and being given grossly different standards of care. Think back to the horrible case of Terry Schiavo and the thousands of people who get referred to simply as vegetables. Talking about disabled people in this manner is so ingrained in our culture that I often don't think we notice that we're engaging in language that incorrectly categorizes human beings as mere objects. This form of objectification is all too common. Another example is the way that we use certain people's pronouns. Something I see online quite a bit is referring to trans or gender nonconforming people with it pronouns. To be clear, when you do this, you're not just not respecting how the person has asked you to refer to them, you're refusing to refer to them as a person at all. Calling someone it doesn't remove their gender identity, it disregards their humanity. And this is being done to a segment of the population who is already at a much higher risk of experiencing physical violence and discrimination. Another version of this that actually always makes me laugh about a little bit is the tendency among pro-life people and everyone else to call unborn children it. It's a boy. How far along is it? Of course, I don't actually think that this is as dangerous as some of the other forms of dehumanization that I've been talking about, but I do think it's interesting, and I really do wonder if, as society finally becomes to recognize the humanity of the preborn members of our family, if this kind of speaking will gradually fade away. Okay, the next form of dehumanization I want to talk about is when human beings are treated as and referred to as simply property. This concept of people as property has been the ideological basis of nearly all instances of slavery, from the Jewish people in Egypt to American chattel slavery to the modern exploitation of incarcerated humans through forced and severely underpaid prison labor within the prison industrial slave complex. This ideology, though, is also prevalent in the ways that our law treats the advancement of reproductive technologies. According to the law, in most states, embryonic human beings created via in vitro fertilization are the literal property of their parents. A few years ago, a freezer malfunctioned at a fertility clinic in Ohio, causing the deaths of thousands of tiny human beings. Do you know what the bereaved parents seeking justice, were offered? A refund. When one couple attempted to sue for the wrongful death of their unborn child, the judge wrote, "The parents may believe that the embryos they created are already persons, but that is a matter of faith or of their personal beliefs, not of science and not of law." So, this leads us to what I believe is one of the most effective forms of dehumanization. The idea of the human non-person. It's so effective because it relies on partial truth. The perpetrators aren't actually denying the humanity of the person or group they're trying to oppress. Rather, that this standard of humanness just isn't as important as I may think. This is why we can have the curious case of the pro-choice embryologist, because of course, no self-respecting believer in science will deny that the product of a same species reproduction is also a differentiated member of that same species, or that during human reproduction, what is produced at fertilization or conception is a genetically distinct, whole, living human organism. No. Rather, what they will try to say is that this particular human with distinct human DNA is not a human being or not a person. And so my response to this line of thinking is that while I appreciate the work of countless pro-life activists who have come before me, who have been fighting to include the unborn within the legal framework of personhood, I think I would like to humbly suggest an alternative. I contend that the very concept of personhood is an illegitimate social and legal construct that, throughout history, has been used almost exclusively to discriminate against whole groups of human beings. I believe in human rights, not person rights, because the definition of who can or can't be a person is ultimately a political and ideological debate that ignores basic scientific facts. At best, the category of human non-person makes the concept of personhood useless. At worst, it makes it deadly and dangerous. If we are going to claim to be supporters of human rights, we must apply them to all humans, regardless of age, size, level of development, location, or level of dependency. Earlier, I said that there were two reasons we should avoid using dehumanizing language. The first being how our words can shape our perceptions. The second, though, and I think possibly more important, is that dehumanizing language simply isn't true. In our culture steeped in fake news, it's still necessary to state truth matters. Without correctly calling something what it objectively is and understanding it as such, it's impossible to come to an accurate moral position on how to treat that thing. And when that thing might be a human being, it really matters. To dehumanize means to use our words to take away the humanity of someone else. But here's the thing, that can't really be done. Our humanity belongs to us, despite the words people may use. Regardless of our age, size, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, nationality, guilt, immigration status, ability level, or anything else, we are all equally human. This isn't an opinion, it's a scientifically demonstrable fact. We gain our humanity when we come into existence at the moment of sperm-egg fusion during fertilization, and we do not lose it when we cross a border or develop a disability or take cross-sex hormones or commit a crime or do anything other than die. Humans are never objects or parasites or beasts. We are always human, as some say, from womb to tomb. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I wish, as always, that we could have been all together. I always love attending the Cardinal O'Connor conference. Hopefully next year, well, really, hopefully next year we won't need to have a Cardinal O'Connor conference or a March for Life or anything, because we will have abolished abortion, and will have made strides to create a culture of life. But if that does not happen within the next 12 months, then hopefully I will see you all next year. Thank you so much to the organizers of the Cardinal O'Connor Conference for inviting me to participate, and the whole Rehumanize team always loves to be here, even though we're not here this year. We will have a table at the virtual conference, so stop by there if you're listening to this before tabling occurs. But anyway, yeah, thank you so much. To learn more and to get involved, please visit rehumanizeintl.org, and you can follow us at rehumanizeintl on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also reach out to me at Herb Geraghty, just first last name, on Twitter if you have any questions or if you just want to argue about anything I said. Thanks again. Have a good day.